Ever feel like the other side isn't just wrong, but living in a different reality? You're not crazy. You're watching a different movie. Like that duck rabbit on screen. Same ink, two worlds. In this episode, we'll look at the hidden moral operating systems driving our politics, debate what freedom really means, and why a healthy society needs both a brake and a gas pedal. Welcome to the Steelman debate. Tonight we're not debating candidates or scandals. We're debating the source code of your values. Psychologists call this naive realism. We assume we're seeing things as they are. But a brain isn't a security camera. It's a meaning-making machine, and it shows up fast in politics and media. In classic experiments, people on opposite sides watched the same coverage, and each came away convinced it was unfairly tilted against them. Not because they're lying, because their minds tag different details as the real problem. So we have one strict ground rule tonight, the Steelman rule. You don't get to attack an argument until you can restate it so well that your opponent says, "Yes, that's exactly what I mean." If you can't do that, you're not debating them. You're shadowboxing a caricature. Joining me to test this are two philosophers. First, the conservative, who prioritizes order and tradition.
Good to be here. I'm looking for the fences we shouldn't tear down until we know why they were built.
And the progressive, who prioritizes equity and systemic change.
Thanks. I'm looking for the people the current system leaves behind, and how to fix the structure itself.
All right, let's calibrate our eyes. We need to map the moral equalizer.
Picture the human mind like an audio mixing board. We've all got the same sliders. What changes is where we set them. On my board, the care channel is turned way up. When someone is suffering, it's the loudest signal in the room. And in moral psychology, especially moral foundations theory, that care-harm slider and the fairness slider tend to be the ones progressives lean on most.
So if I look at your moral radar, it's peaking on care and fairness. Conservative, do you just not hear those frequencies?
We hear them. We value care and fairness, too. But we also keep the other sliders in play. Loyalty, authority, and sanctity. What that framework often calls the binding foundations. Not because we love control for its own sake, but because those instincts help groups coordinate. Who's us? What rules keep things orderly? And what boundaries people treat as non-negotiable?
And this is where we get uneasy. Authority can sound like oppression. Loyalty can drift into exclusion, sometimes even prejudice. And sanctity can become a moral cudgel, especially around people's bodies and private lives.
That shadow side is real. But there's a positive function too. Authority can mean respecting the referee so the game can be played at all. Loyalty is the impulse that makes you show up for your family, your team, your community, especially when it's inconvenient.
Let's test one specific slider, fairness. You both used the word, but I suspect you mean different things.
For us, fairness leans toward equality and equity, making sure the vulnerable aren't locked out by a rigged playing field. Like that classic fence image. If three people are trying to see over it, fairness isn't giving everyone the same box. It's giving support where it's needed, so everyone can actually see.
For us, fairness leans toward proportionality. You should generally get out what you put in. Think of the group project you're seeing on screen. If one student carries the whole thing and everyone gets the same A, that doesn't feel fair. It breaks the link between effort and reward.
I get that. And freeloading feels unfair to us too. But if the struggling student doesn't have a laptop at home or is working nights, then proportionality can turn into punishing bad luck and poverty. That's why we'll often bend the rules of the game in the direction of care.
This is the crux. The progressive sees unequal starting lines and preventable harm. The conservative sees reciprocity fraying and incentives collapsing.
Right. If you erode proportionality too far, people stop trusting the system, and eventually they stop contributing. And with sanctity, we're often talking about shared norms and taboos. Sometimes misguided, yes, but sometimes they're the glue that keeps a community from unraveling.
And we worry that if you cling to tradition or hierarchy without asking who it's hurting, you can end up laundering harm through the language of virtue.
So the disagreement isn't moral versus immoral. It's that you're optimizing against different kinds of disaster. Progressives are especially alert to harm. Conservatives are especially alert to breakdown and disorder. And if you look at that network silhouette on screen, the point is, different settings, same human machinery. A healthy society probably needs both alarms working.
We often disagree on the speed of change because we disagree on the value of the past. To a conservative, a long-standing tradition or law is like that gate across the road on screen. Before you tear it down, answer one question. Why was it put there? That's the idea behind Chesterton's fence, from G.K. Chesterton's 1929 book, The Thing. His point is simple. If you can't yet explain what the fence is doing, that's exactly why you shouldn't remove it. Maybe it keeps cattle in. Maybe it prevents a conflict we've forgotten.
I accept the need for caution, but here's the progressive counterweight. We look at history and see what Theodore Parker described in a sermon published in 1853, the moral arc. And Martin Luther King Jr. later popularized the shorter phrasing. The arc is long, but it bends toward justice. Our fear is that your fence isn't always a safety guardrail. Sometimes it's a cage, built by the powerful and paid for by the vulnerable.
So we have two different risk models here. The conservative worries about breaking a complex system we don't fully understand. The progressive worries about preserving a system that's causing known harm right now.
Exactly. It's about unintended consequences. Society is a complex, living system, not a machine with labeled parts. If you remove a norm because it feels restrictive, you might also remove the quiet solution it was providing. That's epistemic humility, admitting what we don't know.
But waiting for certainty is not a neutral act. Look at the stairwell on screen. If that's the only way in and there's no ramp or lift, wheelchair users are excluded every day. That exclusion is a known harm. So caution can't mean freezing the world in place.
That's fair. When the harm is clear, we should fix it. But consider the tech world's move fast and break things ethos. We scaled connectivity before we built serious guardrails, and we've spent years dealing with downstream effects, like polarization, misinformation, and mental health concerns. That's what happens when we clear the gate before we understand why it's there.
And I'd argue we didn't move fast enough to govern it. The arc doesn't bend on its own. You can see that in the image of people literally pulling it. Parker's optimism and King's urgency both assume human agency. We have to pull the arc. If we treat every fence as sacred, we never leave the pasture.
This is the steel man. The conservative isn't heartless. They're guarding against catastrophic error. The progressive isn't reckless. They're guarding against complacency in the face of suffering. Next, we'll see how this applies to the most American word of all, freedom. We often assume political fights are about who loves freedom more, but a lot of the time they're translation errors. We're using one word for two different moral ideas. Look at the screen. On one side, the safety of a protected bubble. On the other, a ladder towards something you can actually reach. A useful map comes from Isaiah Berlin's 1958 Oxford lecture, Two Concepts of Liberty. He calls them negative liberty and positive liberty. Conservative, start us off. What's the negative version?
Negative liberty is freedom from interference. It's that protected space, like the pawn behind a shield, where other people, including the state, can't just push you around. Think of it as non-interference. If I want to speak, pray, or trade, and no one blocks me, I'm free in that sense. The danger is concentrated power, especially when it insists it's acting for your own good.
So freedom is the absence of a barrier. Progressive, what's missing?
That's real, but incomplete. You can be free on paper and still trapped in practice. That's why we emphasize positive liberty. Freedom to actually do things. Think of the doorways on screen. One is technically open, but it's functionally unreachable. If the only entrance is a steep staircase, a wheelchair user isn't meaningfully free to enter. Real freedom includes the capabilities and the access to act.
Here's the paradox. Each of you thinks the other definition can become dangerous. Conservative. What's the risk in the progressive view?
Paternalism. Once the state decides what capabilities you need, it starts redesigning your life, like that giant hand moving people around a model city. Berlin's warning is that positive liberty can slide into, "We know your true interests better than you do." Historically, that logic gets used to justify coercion. Rousseau's infamous line is that people can be forced to be free.
And progressive. You do see the value in being left alone. What's your critique of the negative view?
The risk is abandonment. It lets a society shrug and say, "You're free to starve," like standing alone in a wide-open desert with no barriers and no support. If the playing field is tilted by poverty or inherited disadvantage, non-interference can end up protecting the winners. Freedom without real opportunity is just a slogan.
So there's a trade-off. We want protection from coercion, and we also want the capacity to live a full life. Two needles searching for a workable middle. One possible bridge is the Republican idea of non-domination, not being at anyone's mercy, public or private, because power is constrained and accountable. A healthy society needs both instincts, each checking the other. So where does this leave us? We didn't crown a winner, and that was never the point. Instead, picture the view on screen, your foot hovering over the pedals. To go anywhere, you need two opposing functions. You need a gas pedal to move forward, and you need a brake to stay in control. In this framework, conservatism often acts like society's risk management function, the brake. It asks, what guardrail are we removing, and what could go wrong? Progressivism often acts like society's debugging function, the gas. It asks, who is getting trapped or harmed by the current system, and what do we fix first? If you only brake, you don't repair what's broken, you just sit there. But if you only accelerate, you eventually lose the road. A healthy society isn't choosing one, it's keeping the tension. Remember that moral equalizer we looked at? It's not a goodness meter, it's a snapshot of what different people are trying to protect. In US Moral Foundations research, people who identify as more progressive tend to prioritize care and equality, while people who identify as more conservative tend to spread their emphasis more broadly, often including loyalty, authority, purity, and proportionality. Now here's the hard truth. Fixing polarization is difficult. A large meta-analysis found that the average effects of many anti-animosity interventions are modest and often fade within about 2 weeks. So there's no one weird trick. It's not a hack, it's maintenance. If you want the line to stay up, you keep practicing the habit. We need the brake so reform doesn't break the institutions that quietly protect us. And we need the gas so stability doesn't harden into permanent injustice. That's why the steel man rule isn't just debate etiquette, it's a pro-democracy skill. You can't tune an engine you refuse to understand. Thanks for listening to this simulation. If you caught yourself nodding along with the other side, even once, then we did our job. See you next time.